I saw the sign a mile before the turn and kept my hands exactly where they were. The road was almost empty, just the white lines moving fast, like somebody drawing arrows into somewhere I could pass. The city sat behind me in a blur of yellow light, every window looking smaller than it did earlier tonight. The map said I should exit in another half a mile, but the song was only halfway done, and I hadn't thought enough about the things I said too quickly, the things I didn't say, the way the quiet follows me at the ending of the day. I wasn't lost, I knew the way, I just wasn't ready to arrive. So I missed the last exit before home, not by accident this time. Let the highway keep on talking, let the dashboard glow like fireflies. There are thoughts I only hear when the world gets far behind. So I missed the last exit before home, just to stay inside the night. A truck passed in the left lane like a ship across the dark. For a second all its headlights threw a sunrise through my car, then it vanished in the distance like a thought I almost caught. And I laughed at how dramatic my own silence somehow got. I remember being younger, thinking grown-ups always knew where to go and when to leave and what the right thing was to do. Now I'm older than I pictured, still unsure most of the time, still pretending that the road ahead is clearer than my mind. But maybe that's fine, maybe nobody knows, maybe we just choose a lane and go. So I missed the last exit before home, not by accident this time. Let the highway keep on humming, let the moon stay in my side mirror. There are parts of me that speak only when the city's out of sight. So I missed the last exit before home, just to stay inside the night. The gas gauge leaned toward empty, but not enough to make me stop. The air outside was colder than the heater could keep off. I passed a row of billboards with faces I didn't know, all smiling like the future was a product they could show. And maybe I was tired, or maybe just awake, but I started thinking gently about every old mistake. Not the kind that breaks you open, not the kind you can't forgive, just the tiny wrong directions that become the way you live. The light turned green at an empty intersection, and no one moved because no one was there. I don't know why that felt like a lesson. Maybe the world keeps going even when nobody cares. Maybe the heart keeps changing in ways we never see. Maybe getting home was never only about reaching the right street. So I missed the last exit before home, and the night opened wide. Let the road stretch out before me like a question with no deadline. I didn't need an answer, I didn't need a sign, The numbers glow like they're trying not to wake the room. The ceiling hasn't changed in years. Same cracks, same shadows, same corner where the paint looks slightly different than the rest. A car passes outside, its headlights crossing briefly over the walls, then disappearing, like somebody turning pages too quickly to read. I close my eyes, then open them again, the way people do when they're pretending. Sleep is already on its way, but tonight my thoughts seem faster than the clock. 2:17 in the morning, and every unfinished question wants a turn. Inside my head, the room stays quiet, the city stays distant, and somehow everything feels larger than it did in daylight. I remember a conversation from 3 weeks ago, a sentence I should have answered differently, a joke I laughed at too late, a story I forgot to finish. The strange thing is, none of it matters, at least not enough to deserve this much attention. But nighttime has its own rules. Things that look tiny at 3 in the afternoon somehow grow taller after midnight, like shadows in the wrong kind of light. 2:17 in the morning, the digital numbers never hurry, never hesitate, never second guess themselves. They just keep changing, 1 minute at a time, while I stay here trying to catch up. I used to think being older meant certainty, that eventually you'd arrive somewhere and finally understand what you were doing. Instead, the years keep passing, and most people seem to be improvising beautifully, pretending confidence until confidence arrives, or doesn't. Maybe that's normal, maybe that's life, maybe that's why the thought makes me smile instead of worry. Another car passes, another set of headlights crosses the ceiling and vanishes. The refrigerator hums. Somewhere down the hall, a train moves through the distance like a memory leaving town. The world keeps moving even while I'm lying still. Final 17 in the morning, and the questions slowly soften. The room grows calmer, the thoughts lose volume. The night doesn't solve anything, it never really does, but sometimes it makes uncertainty feel easier to carry. The numbers change, then 2:19, then 2:20. The ceiling remains exactly the same. The city keeps breathing outside the glass, and somewhere without noticing, I stop chasing answers long enough to finally drift away. You've been following me for miles now. I noticed you above the guardrail just after leaving town, hanging quietly over the dark outline of distant hills. The radio changed stations twice, the highway split in 3 directions. A truck disappeared into the night, and still there you body felt familiar. The moonlight shotgun tonight, silent as ever, watching the road unfold. Mile after mile, never offering answers, never asking questions, just staying there like some old friend who understands the value of quiet company. The city lights faded behind me, one neighborhood at a time. Store signs disappeared, traffic thinned out. The sky grew larger without asking permission. I remember being younger, looking out bedroom windows, trying to figure out who I was supposed to become back then. The moon felt impossibly far away. Now somehow it feels closer, though I know that's not true. Funny how perspective works. The moonlight shotgun tonight, following every curve, every misturn, every unnecessary detour. Without judgment, without advice, just another traveler moving through the dark at exactly the same speed. I passed a lake hidden beside the road. The water reflected the sky so perfectly. For a second, I couldn't tell which direction was up. Maybe that's what growing older is, not finding certainty, but becoming comfortable when things blur together. Past and future, questions and answers, roads and reflections. A cloud crossed slowly between us, and for a moment you disappeared. The seat beside me felt strangely empty. Then the wind shifted, the cloud moved on, and there you were again, exactly where you'd been before, like you'd never left. The moonlight shotgun tonight, above the sleeping towns, above the empty fields, above the miles behind me, and somewhere between the road beneath my tires and the sky above the windshield. I stopped feeling alone without really knowing why. The highway stretches forward, the dashboard glows softly, the radio hums another forgotten song. The night keeps moving, the miles keep passing, and still you're there. Outside the passenger window, keeping pace without effort, without expectation, without ever saying a word. You've been following me for miles now, and honestly, I don't mind. The light turned green, and nobody moved. The city felt unfinished, like somebody paused the movie halfway through the final scene. Storefront sat dark behind metal shutters. The sidewalk stretched quietly between pools of orange light. I stopped at an intersection without another car in sight. The signal changed, red to green, green to yellow, yellow back again, performing its routine for an audience that wasn't there. And somehow I couldn't stop watching. Funny what catches your attention when the world gets quiet enough. The light turned green and nobody moved. The streets stayed empty, the building stayed still. And somehow it felt like a question nobody was asking, but I answered anyway by staying a little longer. A newspaper drifted across the crosswalk, pushed by a wind that seemed undecided about where it was going. A distant siren echoed, then disappeared behind blocks of sleeping apartments. The city wasn't asleep exactly, just speaking more softly than it did during the day. And for the first time all week, I felt like I could hear it. Every place changes when fewer people are looking. The light turned green, then red again, time passing visibly in colored circles. I thought about decisions, I thought about chances, I thought about all the exits I've already missed and the ones ahead. When I was younger, I imagined life would eventually become clear, like arriving somewhere and finally seeing the whole map. Instead, most days feel like intersections, a few directions, a little uncertainty, and a clock counting down before the next change. Maybe nobody ever gets the complete picture. Maybe we just choose a lane and trust ourselves enough to keep moving. The signal changed again, without asking permission, without needing approval, without waiting for confidence. And standing there, I realize most things don't. The seasons don't, the years don't, the people we become don't. They simply continue. The light turned green, the road stretched forward, the city kept breathing, one block at a time. And somewhere between staying still and moving on, I finally understood. You don't always need certainty to continue. The intersection disappeared in the rearview mirror. Another block, another signal, another empty street. The night carried on without explanation, without conclusion, just quietly becoming tomorrow, one light at a time. Between two stations, I almost missed it. The radio clicked softly as I turned the dial, searching through static and half-finished conversations. A weather report faded and then disappeared. A song arrived for 3 seconds before dissolving back into noise. The city rolled past slowly outside the windshield, street signs flashing briefly, then falling behind. And somewhere between the signals and the silence, I heard a melody I hadn't thought about in years. Funny how memory works, it never knocks first. Somewhere between the static and the spaces in between, a forgotten piece of yesterday found its way back to me. Not clearly, not completely, just enough to stay a while. I couldn't remember the name of the song or where I'd heard it first. Only fragments remained. A summer evening, a bus stop, a pair of headphones, a version of myself I barely recognized now. The signal faded again, leaving only white noise, but somehow the memory stayed long the static and the passing headlights, old stories resurfaced without asking permission. Not because they mattered more than anything else, just because the night happened to find them. I used to think the past disappeared one day at a time, but maybe it waits hidden in melody, street names, certain smells, and random frequencies, waiting patiently for the right moment to remind you who you used to be. Not so you can go back, just so you can see how far you've come. The signal grew stronger, then weaker, then vanished completely. The dashboard glowed blue against the dark highway, and for a second the silence felt louder than the music ever had. Somewhere between the static and the road ahead, I stopped chasing the memory and let it drift like radio waves, crossing the darkness without needing a destination. The dial kept turning, station after station, song after song, voice after voice. The city grew smaller, the night grew deeper, and somewhere out beyond the noise, another signal waited to be found. Between two stations, I almost missed it, and maybe that's why I remember it. For a second, I couldn't tell which side of the glass I belonged to. The city moved in fragments, neon signs, traffic lights, apartment windows blinking past one after another. The train kept gliding forward without asking whether anyone was ready. The glass beside me held two versions of the night, the one outside and the one looking back. My reflection drifted across unfamiliar buildings like a ghost borrowing someone else's skyline. Maybe that's why I kept staring. The lights outside kept moving, the face inside stayed still. Somewhere between the two I lost track of where the city ended and where I began. For a moment everything blurred together, and somehow that felt honest. The station appeared then disappeared before I had time to read its name. People stepped off, people stepped on, entire stories changing direction without making a sound. A girl in headphones watched the darkness. An old man slept against the window. A couple laughed quietly at something I couldn't hear. And somehow all of us were moving toward different tomorrows on the same train. The night has a way of making strangers feel familiar. The lights outside kept moving, the reflections stayed beside me. Street after street, building after building, the city rearranged itself in the glass like a puzzle that didn't need solving. When I was younger, I imagined life as a straight line, a destination, a clear direction. Now it feels more like reflections, things lines overlapping, past and present, certainty and doubt. The person I was and the person I'm becoming, sharing the same window for a little while. The train entered a tunnel and suddenly the outside disappeared, leaving only reflections floating in the dark. Rows of silent faces suspended in black glass. For a moment, it felt like the entire world had folded inward. The lights outside returned one by one, the city breathing again beyond the window. And somewhere between the reflections and the distance, I stopped trying to separate everything. Maybe some things are allowed to overlap. The next station arrived. The doors opened. The train continued. The city continued. The reflection faded slowly as the glass filled with light. And for a second, just before it disappeared, I thought I recognized the person looking back. For a second, I think they recognized me too. Forecast never mentions this kind of weather. The street looked familiar, the way old photographs do, recognizable, but somehow different. The corner store was closed. The bus stop sat empty. A bicycle leaned quietly against a fence, like it had nowhere urgent to be. The air felt cooler than it had earlier. Not cold, just enough to notice. The kind of temperature that makes you zip up your jacket halfway and leave it there. Some nights arrive without introducing themselves. Every streetlight has its own weather, its own color, its own way of holding the dark. Some glow softly, some buzz quietly. Some seem older than the buildings beside them, and somehow the whole city feels different depending on which one you're standing under. A train moved somewhere beyond the rooftops, too far away to see, close enough to hear. A window opened on the third floor of an apartment. A laugh drifted briefly into the street, then disappeared. The trees barely moved, but the leaves kept whispering, as if the night had something important to say and wasn't quite sure how to say it. Maybe that's why I kept walking. Every streetlight has its own weather, its own small atmosphere, a different version of the same road waiting beneath it. The city never really changes, yet somehow it never stays the same. When I was younger, I thought places were permanent, that roads stayed roads and buildings stayed buildings. But now I think they're partly made of memory, partly made of timing, partly made of who's beside you and who isn't. The same block can feel entirely different depending on the night. A cloud crossed the moon, the shadows shifted, the sidewalk changed shape for a moment. Nothing moved and yet everything looked different. That's the strange thing about nighttime. It can transform a place without touching it. Every street light has its own weather, its own way of telling time, its own version of silence waiting below. And tonight the city feels softer than it did yesterday. Maybe because it changed, maybe because I did. The forecast never mentions the warmth of a quiet street, the sound of distant tires, the glow above an empty crosswalk, the smell of rain that never arrives, the feeling of walking home without hurrying. The forecast never mentions this kind of weather, but somehow it's always been my favorite. A line of light crossed the ceiling, then disappeared. The room stayed still long after midnight, the air conditioner humming its familiar melody. The curtains barely moved against the glass, the city somewhere outside, continuing without me. A pair of headlights slid across the wall, then climbed slowly upward before fading away. For a second, the room looked different, then returned to exactly what it was. Some thoughts work the same way. They arrive without warning, bright enough to notice, soft enough to miss. If you're looking somewhere else, crossing quietly through the dark before slipping out of sight, leaving only the feeling that they were there. I remembered a summer evening from years ago, not clearly, just fragments that rode beside the water, music from an open window, the color of the sky. Just before it became night, the memory stayed for less than a minute, then drifted away before I could understand why it returned in the first place. The mind keeps strange hours, thoughts arrive like headlights passing through a room, never staying long enough to belong there. Some become stories, some become dreams, most disappear before they find a name. When I was younger, I wanted answers for every question, a reason for every feeling, a destination for every road. Now I think some things were meant to pass through, like weather, like seasons, like light crossing a ceiling at 2 in the morning. Another car passed outside, another shape of brightness moved across the walls, then vanished. The room remained, the bed remained, the silence remained, and somehow that felt comforting. Thoughts arrive without warning and leave the same way. Some whatever comes next. A line of light across the ceiling, then another, then another. The city breathing softly beyond the curtains. The night stretching onward without asking anything. And somewhere between one passing shadow and the next, sleep finally arrived so quietly I almost nested. I wrote the first line, then erased it. The cursor blinked steadily, like it had all the patience in the world outside. A distant train crossed the darkness, a few apartment windows still held on to light. The night wasn't silent, just quieter than it had been before. I tried to describe the day, but the words arrived sideways. A street I couldn't name, a song from a passing car, the moon above an overpass, the feeling of missing an exit on purpose. Things that made sense while they were happening and less sense afterward. Some thoughts are better at being felt than explained. These midnight pages never tell the whole story, they catch fragments before they disappear. Half-finished sentences, unnecessary details, tiny moments that refuse to leave. And somehow that's enough. I started writing about tomorrow and ended up somewhere 5 years ago, remembering a version of myself who thought certainty was waiting around the corner, like a destination marked clearly on a map. The strange thing is, I don't miss that person, but sometimes I miss their confidence, the way they believed every question had an answer somewhere. Now I think most answers arrive quietly. These midnight pages keep collecting pieces, streetlights, radio signals, reflections in dark glass, conversations that ended hours ago, and thoughts that arrived too late. A younger version of me would have edited everything, cut the uncertainty, fixed the rough edges, made the story cleaner. Now I leave some mistakes exactly where they are, because life never sounded like a perfect sentence. Anyway, maybe that's why the unfinished parts feel the most honest. The city kept breathing outside the window, cars passing occasionally like distant waves. The clock moved forward without asking permission. The page slowly filled, not with answers, but with evidence that I was here, that this day existed, that these thoughts matter, at least for tonight. These midnight pages won't change the future, won't solve the question, won't draw a clearer map, but they hold the moments that would have disappeared if nobody noticed. And sometimes being noticed is enough. I wrote another sentence, then another. The city grew quieter, the night grew deeper, the page wasn't finished. Neither was I, but somewhere between the crossed out lines, the unfinished thoughts, the words I couldn't quite place, and the ones I finally could, I stopped trying to make everything make sense. I wrote the first line, then erased it, and somehow that felt like a beginning. The road looks different when you're no longer trying to escape it. The city sat behind me in smaller and smaller pieces. Traffic lights fading into the rear view mirror. The radio finally settled on a station I liked, not because it was perfect, just because I stopped changing it. The highway curved gently toward familiar places, road signs counting down the distance remaining. And for the first time tonight, I wasn't measuring miles, I was simply driving. Funny how the night changes when you stop asking it questions. The road still stretches forward, but it doesn't feel endless now. The headlights carve a path through the darkness ahead, not revealing everything, just enough to keep moving. And somehow that's all I've ever needed. A truck passed slowly on the opposite side, its lights disappearing before I could follow them. The moon still hung above the same patient passenger from miles ago, watching silently as the exits became familiar. I thought about all the things I didn't figure out tonight, the questions still waiting, the conversations unfinished, and strangely none of it felt heavy anymore. Maybe understanding everything was never the goal. The road still stretches forward, the future still stays hidden. The signs appear then disappear one by one, but for once I don't need the whole map to trust the direction. The neighborhoods returned in reverse order, the gas station, the overpass, the intersection where nobody stopped, the road where the moon stayed beside me, the station on the radio, the streets beneath those streetlights, pieces of the night returning quietly like chapters closing themselves without being told. A younger version of me would have wanted conclusions, a lesson, an answer, a reason for every detour. But standing where I am now, I think some nights exist simply to be lived. Some roads exist simply to be driven, and some questions don't need solving to matter. The road still stretches forward, beyond tomorrow, beyond next year, beyond everything I can see. But tonight, the distance feels smaller, the darkness feels softer, the silence feels kind, and somewhere between the first mile and the last, I stopped feeling lost. The dashboard glows softly city sleeps behind me. The sky begins changing, almost too slowly to notice. The radio plays quietly, the moon hangs low, the road keeps unfolding exactly as roads do. One turn, one sign, 1 mile at a time. Nothing was solved, nothing was fixed. The world remains as unfinished as ever. But tonight, that feels alright. The road looks different when you're no longer trying to escape it. And somehow that feels like home.